Wherefore, Series 2, Episode 40. It wasn't deliberate, which may strike you as both unlikely and difficult to get to grips with. Let me assure you that in certain circumstances it is entirely possible for someone to accidentally remove their own head, and then, only in the chaotic aftermath of having removed their own head, do they get to grips with the implications. Magical things do not always look rational from a non-magical perspective, so you may just have to trust me that this is how it is. Quite by accident, the man in the moon takes his moon head off and finds that he is the man in the moon no longer. He had a name once before he became his lunar self. He had a face once that was not a phase of the moon, although he does not remember that either. Having taken off his head by accident, he does still have a head, obviously. For now, in the hopes of keeping the confusion minimal, we may have to refer to him as the man in the moon, even though he isn't. Otherwise it will get unwieldy. The former man in the moon? The artist previously known as Gibbous. I should not joke at his expense. It is a hard thing to go through. Names are important. So are faces. And jests. There are many humans who wander off the paths of usual human progress. People turn into myths and gods, archetypes, and other such oddities all the time. Alongside them are the wonders and magics who turn into something like people, with varying degrees of success, it must be added. In addition to all of that, there are those who wander around between various states, half remembering that they were once gods, once been men, once the living embodiment of despair, and so forth. Shape-shifting on the outside is fairly easy to make sense of. The ones who shapeshift inside their skin and behind their faces are astoundingly hard to work to understand. You think you know them, but you cannot know them. There is no telling who is in the process of turning into someone else. You may be one such soul yourself. In fact, I rather hope you are. What are you becoming? Who of your previous selves do you properly remember? How many names, labels, titles, and identities have you had along the way, and how many more are there to come? You don't know. You can't know. These things are unknowable, even as you live through them. Taking off his moon face does not cause the man in the moon to suddenly remember other people he used to be. It doesn't work like that. Instead, there will be confusion and wandering about. You may see him in the streets during Stroud's Goodwill evening, easier to look at now that he is not emitting light. You may see him following the great peacock lantern through the streets as though its passing is an act of sacred pilgrimage. Sometimes he is out painting on the underpasses and the sides of buildings, leaving graffiti messages for his future selves. It is a strange time. It being December, the weaver dies. You were here for that last year, most likely, and you know how it goes. The first time you encounter the weaver in this process, it tends to seem more dramatic than it really is. To the uninitiated, it looks like a final state, not a passing phase. The weaver isn't very good at winter, and is rather fond of the wheel of the year and of melodrama. So, most years at some point around midwinter, the weaver indulges in a bit of dying. Some years it is exposure in one of the high fields. Sometimes she goes into the river, or buries herself up in Bisley Old Road Cemetery to think mournful thoughts about glowworms. Most years it only lasts for a few days, enough to entirely avoid Christmas. Death can be cathartic in the short term, but it gets dull after a while. Last year was a bit of an anomaly, with the weaver sinking into oblivion for so long. It was out of character for her, but then everything was mad last year. There will be no east wind to surround her this winter. Looking back, she does not know whether that was a comfort or a disaster. It may take a while yet before that becomes clear. The trouble with being a character in your own story is not knowing what kind of story you are in. Your life is not clearly marked by genre. Are you an action-packed adventure? Or are you some kind of literary fiction where nothing much happens but everybody thinks about it a lot? Are you in an absurdist play? Or a soap opera? You may have your suspicions. but you do not know. Not until the whole shape of your story life is revealed. Unfortunately, this is also the point at which you die. You also do not know where you are in the story. In a book or film, when everything has gone wrong and you're about halfway through, you know there's time for conflict resolution and happily ever after. Where are you in the story your life is playing out right now? Is this just the midsection filler before we get to the climax, or did the story end already? Are you in the after story now, shaped by the important bit but where nothing really happens? The Weaver thinks about life in these terms and is fond of third-person narration. Is there any more story to come, or is the gist of it told? Sometimes she is afraid that she is trapped inside some sort of supernatural soap opera, where it will be one improbable thing after another, with no real sense to any of it. Will her final death be like falling forever from the roof of a building? She may have played out her romance narrative, only to find it was a miserable take in a literary style all along. Nothing much really happened, after all, and she has thought about it a great deal. It is an unsatisfactory story arc, and she is cross about that. She knows the man in the moon is not the man in the moon anymore, and is wandering about without his bright face. Is this where the theme music cuts in at the end of an episode? Can she have no resolution on anything? The Weaver is an overthinker with meta issues. It's an occupational hazard. And anyway, she hates winter and Christmas and lockdown. She is tired of being herself and unable to imagine who else to be. She wants a story shape she can recognise so that she knows what part to play in her own life. What she really needs is for some other Weaver to enter the narrative and spin her a thread beyond her wildest imaginings. It is hard to weave an exciting future out of the threads of your own boredom and despair. It is time for someone else to run their fingers over the weave and add some magic. The Weaver had thought it would be the east wind who would change the shape of her story and make things fresh and new. He has failed her entirely in this regard. He will be no help for the foreseeable future. But there are other Weavers, and other fingers toying with the threads. While the Weaver is undertaking her self-indulgent seasonal death rituals, it is possible that her story is being reframed by someone else. What kind of tale will it be? A redemption arc, perhaps? A witchlit magical empowerment happily ever after story, if you are so inclined.